So as you've heard, my name is Renee. I do tweet at Data Renee. I'm a business intelligence analyst and I live here in New York City. So we are talking about typo positive, when collection doesn't get you what you need. And what this is a discussion of how data collection can impact your data quality. And so first we need to agree on some broad things. And one of those things is, what is data? So we are all just going to skip right over the fact that data exists, and we're going to say that it is a representation of some aspect of the world. Data, further, is pieces of information that have a format. They are facts that are used for making decisions, and for our purposes, it's information stored in and or used by a computer. So then, of course, because we're talking about data quality, we want to distinguish good data. And so for our purposes today, good data is simply fit for its intended uses in operations, planning, and decision-making. And we might want to think about why we want good data. So for our purposes, we're going to be thinking about things like making plans, getting our operations completed. We all want to look smart. We all want to save or make money. We want to make decisions and choices. And for our first database joke, we want to complete transactions. So now we need to think about what are we going to look at to make the decision, is this data good or not? So from the UK international arm of the Data Management Association, I pulled these 6 dimensions for data quality assessment. These are very commonly used around the world. Completeness, uniqueness, timeliness, validity, accuracy, and consistency. So in data-based worlds, we often talk a lot about uniqueness and consistency, but these others are also important. So we're going to review each of these concepts. What completeness means is that there aren't any gaps in the expected data that we have, and that we have enough data for the task that we have at hand. And when I say there aren't any gaps, I mean there aren't any unexpected gaps. For uniqueness, we're hoping that we don't have duplicates in our data. For timeliness, we're hoping that first, we have the most recent data available, and that the recency of this data is appropriate for our task, as well as the fact that our data is accessible in a time that works for our needs. We're going to move on to validity and talk about a couple of things, 4 things. Could we assess the format, syntax, and type and see that they're correct for what we're expecting? Could the data be accurate? Meaning, is it true that we've stored the right information, which is the next thing? And is the data in range for what we are expecting? And are there any unexpected null values? So this brings us back to completeness, right? Then we return to accuracy. Have we stored the correct value? And are the units of measure appropriate? Rounding out with consistency, are there conflicts between data sources? This is hard to measure because sometimes if there are differences between data sources, then you have to decide which one's correct. And then does the database only change in expected ways? This isn't something we're going to handle here in data collection because we are ideally not changing the database. The famous XKCD comic about little Bobby tables, when the mother puts in the name with a semicolon and drops the tables and deletes the whole, that is a serious problem with data collection that we're not going to really talk much about today, but we'll hit on it a little. So another thing that we all need to agree on is that there are 2 kinds of data. There's qualitative data and there's quantitative data. Quantitative data you can think of as easily expressed as a number. These are things like distances, weights, counts, time. Qualitative data is not easily expressed as a number, and this is things like color, mood, reasons, and opinions. Then we think about our data funnel. What we're talking about today is just the top of the funnel, acquisition and entry. We're not going to talk about cleaning. We're not going to talk about storage. We're not going to talk about analysis. And we're definitely not talking about profit. We do want to think about how we get data, because that's what this talk hinges on: collecting and entering data, potentially causing problems with your data quality. There are lots of different ways that we can get data. We've got a sample here: sensors, questionnaires, surveys, interviews, forms, scales, observations, focus groups, oral histories, archives, clocks, measuring sticks, dozens if not hundreds more. So what we're going to talk about is what can go wrong. So we're just going to touch on a few things, and the first one is sensors. What can go wrong with sensors? Couple of things. We can have corrosion. We can have condensation. So condensation is especially a problem in things like food service when you're measuring out and bottling items, and you want to make sure that you're putting the correct amount of an item into a bottle. If you have condensation, you can have something called pressure drift, which can really mess up the quantity of something in there. Calibration: is the machine actually measuring correctly? This could be a scale or something that measures vibration. Time zones: if your sensor isn't telling you it's in the right time zone, it can cause you all kinds of problems. And then the mounting of your sensor or the machine that has a sensor on it can also cause you problems with things like vibration. So things that we can do about this: maintenance, hugely important. I want to let you know that I'm using a hammer symbol here, and I find the hammer to be really helpful to think about, because hammers can fix things, and they can also break things. So yes, maintaining the environment and your machine are really important for things like corrosion and condensation. But if the person doing your maintenance isn't doing it well, it's not actually helping. So you can't simply check the box, someone did the maintenance. You have to be relatively sure that the maintenance was done correctly. For things like calibration and mounting, this again, regular maintenance, in addition to initial installation. As database people, it's really tempting for us to think that these things don't have anything to do with us, but they do. So while we can't have control over these things, we can ask the people in our company, when was the last time this machine or sensor was checked? Is there a record of this? And then finally with time zone, this is where it really becomes relevant in the database. Does the time zone in our database match the time zone of the sensor? Because if we're storing it as UTC and what they're giving us is a local time, we're suddenly in a different day, potentially. So there are more issues with sensors that we can have. Printed circuit boards, cybersecurity, fuel quality can interfere with oxygen measurements, and of course maintenance as a whole catch-all bucket. So for printed circuit boards, we want to avoid 90-degree angles and angles that are acute, less than 90 degrees. And this, again, is something that doesn't feel like it's anything we have any control over, but we can certainly ask. If you are having electromagnetic interference in a printed circuit board, you can get terrible data. And if you have what's called an acid trap, it can also cause problems with the way that the electrical circuit works. So making sure that the company that printed your circuit boards hired a real electrical engineer, that's the word I wanted, who was actually trained in circuit design. Again, not something that we directly have control over, but certainly something as data people we can say, this is an important thing that you might want to think about, and odds are pretty good that someone in your company hasn't necessarily thought about it. For cybersecurity, there are a lot of different ways that cybersecurity can be a problem with all sorts of places in the data world. So we always want to invest in testing. For fuel quality sensors, for things like vehicles where we're still using gasoline, we want to make sure, first of all, that we're using appropriate fuel, and the maintenance is also a thing that, while not on this form, I've repeated it enough that you probably are aware that I'm going to say. Maintain your engines so that you know that the oxygen readings are true. And just always do regular maintenance, because there are at least a dozen things that I didn't mention here that come up that a qualified professional can help you with. Next, we're going to move on to GPS, which is a very popular way to collect data. Many of you here in the financial district with us, and those of you who are watching at home, may have either driven through a beautiful mountain landscape or have tried to navigate while walking in between very tall city buildings, and have learned that the GPS may jump you around or may tell you that you arrived earlier or later than you did in reality. And so in the city, this is called an urban canyon, and in a real canyon, it's called a canyon. But it's also called the canyon. But it's also called the canyon effect in other situations where there's a very similar thing. And what happens, for a very quick, dirty, and terribly inaccurate overview of GPS, how it works is that your device is communicating with one or more satellites above you. And in a canyon, you have to get a satellite to be exactly above you because you don't have access to anything at any other angle. And so that gives you access to fewer satellites, which means slower updates to your data. So in a perfect world, you would just avoid canyons. But we don't live in that world. So the best way that you can mitigate this is to have the sensor on the top of your vehicle or near a window rather than stuck. You see in movies a lot, someone puts a GPS signal at the very bottom of a vehicle to hide it. It doesn't work as well, but it's not perfect having it on top of the vehicle. That's just the best you can get. So then we also have a problem with GPS with cold starts. This is a problem with a whole lot of technology. If you haven't used it in a while, it's not going to give you an accurate reading right away. So try to keep it in use. Not enough satellites is a problem that happens in various places and for various reasons and at different times of day. So my suggestion for this is to have an alternate collection. This would be something like have a driver and a navigator, and have the navigator occasionally make a note where you are at a given time, if that is something that your organization cares about, how long it took you to go between waypoints. Sometimes you've made, or your company has made, choices about hardware that make it hard to get an accurate reading, or that make it hard for the longevity of your GPS reader to be acceptable. So you may want to think about convincing your company to get better hardware, to say, we want to make an upgrade. And then you also sometimes run into a situation where low battery can cause intermittent readings, intermittent failures, and of course if your battery gets very low, you just stop getting data altogether. So that's really a very big completeness problem, right? Further issues that come up with GPS. This is also something here in the city and in real canyons, multipath signals and bounce. And what this causes is it looks like you're walking through the center of a building when really you know you're on a street. Which is amusing, but not super helpful when you're trying to figure out which of these 4 streets you're actually on. We do also see software issues in addition to hardware issues. So this is things like perhaps upgrading to a better software provider, but also sometimes we find that software becomes outdated and you say, oh, this particular software has been through 5 or 6 upgrades. And maybe this version that we're running on our equipment is end of life. You would want to get new software. And then atmospheric conditions are things like rain, snow, heavy clouds, again, interfering with satellites that are overhead. They just can't, quote unquote, see you. In a situation like this, you can either, as I said earlier, try alternative methods like writing down where you are and what time it was, or having an app that you can input that information into and then merge that data. But you can also simply, as an organization, agree to accept less complete data, lower frequency of collection. Oh, clocks. What can go wrong with clocks? We literally don't have time for that today. That could be a whole talk, and I plan to give that talk at some point, but time is a huge problem. I love time. My coworkers think it's hysterical that I really like being the person that they throw our time zone issues and clock calibration problems to, but we can't get there today. So next we're going to talk about asking people things. And there are a couple of different ways that we get information from human beings, and human beings are a problem. It's very, very common to, and this is where we get into a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. Questionnaires, surveys, focus groups, oral histories, interviews. This is a lot of things like, when did something happen? Why did you do something? Who was there? Where did it happen? And sometimes it's things like, what is happening now? And problems that we run into here are things like choosing subjects. Simply the question of who we decide to talk to has an impact on what we'll call the quality of our data. Because remember that what we've already agreed on here is that good data is data that's useful for helping us make the decisions that we want to make, helping us look smart, helping us make money, helping us complete transactions. And then simply the cost of completing these endeavors of getting information from people can be prohibitive. Contacting respondents. Sometimes people are hard to contact to begin with, hard to contact for follow-up. Keeping respondents engaged. Once someone has started giving you information, are they going to continue through the process of giving you that same high quality of information that they were able to give you when you started your conversation? This deteriorates for a number of reasons. Sometimes the questions become intrusive. Sometimes the process becomes boring. Sometimes they realize that, oh, I thought this was going to be a quick thing, and it turns out you need me for an hour. And sometimes you may realize that some of these collection methods aren't flexible. Things like surveys have a fixed format, and it's always the same set of questions. And so if a customer or a research subject gets to question 3 and says, well, it depends on what's going on, or, oh gosh, this is just a yes or no thing, but it's really a deeper, mushier subject, you don't have any opportunity to gather more information from that person. So when you are having a huge problem choosing subjects, it simply can't be done. You can use things like what are called program data, and that's things like who showed up in a place. So this isn't necessarily a program like a computer program's data, but like an activity program's data. Who showed up in a place? What were the demographics of the people who were there? How often did people come? As for assessing the cost of these different kinds of data collection methods, sometimes you'll find that hiring a firm is a more cost-effective way to get this data than it is to create your own survey. And by cost-effective, I mean value for money spent, because sometimes you have someone on staff who is a professionally trained survey creator. If you do not have that person, the survey that you create may quite literally be garbage. Contacting respondents. This is something like relying on site visitors. Maybe this is people who actually come to your physical site, and this is maybe people who come to your website. Now, of course, if you need information about why people aren't coming to your site, only contacting people who come to your site is not going to give you that information. So, good luck. Keeping respondents engaged. It turns out you have about 8 minutes before you lose people. So what SurveyMonkey found over tens of thousands of surveys that they have had access to people running, SurveyMonkey is able to see how long people spent not only completing a survey, but when they started behaving in engagement behaviors like choosing the most extreme option, or speeding through the survey items. So answering questions much faster than you could potentially read the full question, read and comprehend the full question. And what they find is that fairly consistently, regardless of what's going on in the survey, 8 minutes is about where people start engaging in these behaviors. And then regarding the flexibility, if you really need that deep, deep qualitative data, you may want to consider things like focus groups where you can engage in a conversation and have more of a choose your own adventure where you can say, tell me more, or allow people to freehand write a longer response about that experience. And interviews can be really great. Now, some problems with these are things like social acceptability bias and the Hawthorne effect. Simply knowing that we are being observed can cause us to behave differently. And understanding what a surveyor or an interviewer is trying to find out can lead us subconsciously or otherwise to provide the information that we think the researcher or interviewer wants. This is, of course, something that anyone who's completed a job interview is painfully aware of. Trying to get information from a candidate that isn't just what they think you want to hear. So next we have forms. And this can be online forms or paper forms. And what we have here is, again, questionnaires, surveys, focus groups, oral histories, interviews can be done on paper or online, not just in person. And so you have things like handwriting. And this is a form as simple as a prescription or a form as simple as an intake form for a medical practice. You also have data entry delay. If a person is coming into your medical practice and they handwrite all of their information about their insurance and their date of birth, and then the person who has received that piece of paper doesn't put it into the computer in time, there can be delays in getting paid by insurance. There can be delays in knowing which pharmacy to send their prescription to. Electronic form settings can be a delightful problem. I had an experience signing up for an online airline rewards program, and I entered my date of birth, and then I clicked to the next page, and they were kind enough to tell me what birth date they had received for me, and it was off by a month. And I thought to myself, wow, I must have been in a hurry. I got that wrong. So I tried to fix it, and they wouldn't let me fix it. But then I started to doubt myself, so I went back and restarted the process with a fake Renee and put in a different month. One that I decided I was going to pick a month that I knew had 31 days, and I was going to put the 31st of that month in. And it told me that that was not a valid date. And I said, okay, well, it wasn't me. And then what I did was I looked more closely at the drop-down box of months, and I saw that December was at the top of the list, and January came under December. And so it was a really funny off by one error where they had put me in a different month that was one off from where I was actually born. I did end up having to send several emails to this airline and say, could you fix this before I travel? I would like to get where I'm going. So yeah, boy, that's exciting and interesting. And then you have interesting areas with access to technology. And this is both with clients and also in areas that don't have either internet connection or reliable repair for the technology at hand. So for things like handwriting, if a doctor has terrible handwriting, it's a really, for all doctors, whether a doctor has good handwriting or not, it's very common practice now for a doctor to do their prescriptions electronically. It's much harder for a doctor to say, clearly I wrote paracetamol. I don't understand why the pharmacy filled something else that starts with a P. Very little argument there when it's in black and white. And this can be an option even on cellular phones. So not just for doctors, but also your patients. If you're worried about having the staffing necessary to take a handwritten document and turn it into something typed, why not save the time and just have the customer do that entry one time? And then with that data entry delay, again, providing secure web forms so that people can do this from the safety of their own home and not worry about, am I going to write this down and have it left sitting out in an office? In addition to, is it maybe going to get shredded before it gets entered where it needs to be? For electronic form settings, such as my case where I had an off by 1 error, double check them. Try as a data professional to get the people who are designing your web forms to let you look at them. Try to get an opportunity to review and make sure that things are in the right order. And as for access to technology, there are a couple of things that we can do. Something that springs to mind is if you can't have a web app that allows your clients to input their information from the comfort of their home, when they come to your office, I'm sorry, Robert, was that a question? Oh, okay. If you can't have them do these things from home, what you can do is have a kiosk in your office. Many of you may have seen in a medical practice, scan your ID, scan your insurance card, and then go ahead and type in all of your information about where you live and how to contact you. Access to technology is also something where we can consider an offline first approach to a lot of data collection in various areas. And this is things like collecting all of the information with technology and then uploading it all at once later. Sometimes this is also a satellite issue where if we don't have plug-in internet, we may be relying on satellite internet. So what I hope for all of you to take away from this, as I've offered you many different ways to think about alternatives that you can think of, is design your initial data collection. Think about the limitations that you might be facing. Implement with that. Collect some data. See how it goes. Are we able to get this quick enough? Is this giving us data that's recent and new enough? Are we keeping up with the information of our patients as they change? Are we collecting the advertising data that's coming in? And then test. Revisit your needs. Think about what did we incorrectly assume when we got started? And with that, I thank you all, and I would like to know what questions you have. Stories about time. Most of them are terrible. Okay, yes. So trying to compare time when one is stored in UTC and one is stored in local time, and you know that one is in local and one is in UTC, but neither is marked. So you have to do a lot of digging around to figure out how to figure out which one is UTC and which one is local. And what this involved was going back to the notes that customer service reps had taken and finding customer service reps' notes that had said client reports that they did a thing at this time, and knowing that client lives in a particular time zone and then figuring out, oh, okay, so according to the timestamp of when they were doing this behavior and the timestamp of when they reported doing it, it was a lot of sleuthing. And you can't do that with just one. You have to check a couple, you have to find a couple. So it would have really helped if the customer service representative's notes had been in a more searchable form than just text. Like TS Vector would have been nice. So there's a lot of That was a lot of sleuthing. I'm still mad about that one. Robert?
The time when this comes up for me on a fairly regular basis is somebody sends a log file and says, what's wrong with my database? And, you don't know what their time zone is. You don't know whether the time zone of their computer is the same as their time zone.
Right?
And you also don't know whether their system clock bears any resemblance to reality.
It doesn't.
But they tell you when the problem happened, and then you're supposed to find the messages in the log file that are relevant to that.
Yeah, so this becomes a very meta problem, the data quality of your database, which is fascinating to me. Oh, that looked like it was painful for you, Henrietta. I'm sorry to laugh, but yeah. My suggestion, and something that I do at every organization, is I say to people, I understand it's going to be really painful to recode everything that refers to these columns, but can we please add UTC or local to all of the column names that involve time? Or could we just set everything to UTC and just tell everybody this is always UTC? Because I do see a lot of formulas and analyses that, for instance, maybe save everything in the database as New York time, even though everyone is all across America, north, south, central. And so they're just like, we're just going to put it all in New York. And I say, well, what happens when your auditor wants to know what happened on January 1st? And you've got midnight, January 1st in New York, and 9 p.m. in California, people buying things. And I literally had an accountant say to me, it all comes out in the wash because December 31st does the same thing. And I said, I don't think an auditor is going to want to hear that. It, as far as I know, has not been corrected. So time is just so many problems, and it's not just collecting the data, but how as an organization you think about what is the truth, what is today, what is tomorrow, and these are philosophical questions that you can get a whole PhD in. So I'm not gonna make any broad statements about what's true and what's today, though it's tempting. Does anybody in the audience have any fun time stories or horrifying time stories? Leticia and then Gabrielle.
Funny enough, France is the country with the most different number of time zones. And that's a nightmare when working with databases, because France is very central to Paris time zone. And so everything is supposed to be according Paris time zone, but there are 12 or 14 different time zones depending on the changing hours. So that's a nightmare in France.
Time zones. So, yeah, changing of daylight savings time, there's actually a push in America to get us all on a standardized thing so we don't do this time clock dance 2 times a year. And we have some states that don't do the time clock dance. Arizona is famously one of them. But we also have some counties in the US that don't do the time clock dance. And this is a data collection horror show. If you live in one county and work in another, or need to go to a hospital in another, or need to do business with another, keeping track of what happened when is just deliciously complicated. Gabrielle, let's hear your time story.
Thank you. Is this on? Hello? Okay. So I came to work at this place that, okay, well, I don't want to reveal who it is. Anyway, the database had several tables, and most of the tables were 75 columns or greater, and most of those tables had at least 50 columns.
I love it.
That were timestamp, no time zone. And it was very critical that we track progress of certain tasks by these timestamps. And I kept telling my developers, you need to use timestamp with time zone. And they said, who cares? Everything's in UTC. And I said, that's fine until somebody connects from their personal machine. They said, well, that never happens. So one day we start getting tasks like out of order and figured out that the person that was developing a new tool was running it from his laptop, and he was in a different time zone than we were, and everything was off by like 3 or 4 hours. And that was really interesting to try to track down where the change had happened for each record.
Right.
Yeah, that was weeks of work.
Yeah, and if, like Robert said, your machine isn't set to where you actually are, it's complicated. Yeah, I'm a big fan of timestamp with time zone, but also a big fan of being consistent. If you're going to get it wrong, please get it wrong the same way all the time. Yes, agreement, yes.
100%.
Wrong in a way I can understand and predict. What other questions or time stories do we have? Do we have any handwriting stories? Do we have any other, I filled out an internet form, gave it true information, and it told me that I was a liar? I like those. Leticia?
The problem I have with forms is just they don't accept my name because my name is invalid.
Yes, there's a really great blog post. I believe the number is 23, but it might be 28, things that programmers get wrong about names. And this is a huge data entry related data quality thing because so many people are getting told that their name is not a real name. So it's not only a data quality problem, but it's also like a PR problem and a human relations problem, and super frustrating.
And there's a Twitter account, it's @yournameisvalid, that you can tweet screenshots when they say that your name is invalid.
Yeah, very, very common. People who have 1 or 2 letter names, people who have names that may be considered to have inappropriate language in them, accents, diacritical marks.
What's wrong? Leticia, what's wrong with your name?
Yeah. Transliteration, I mean, not even just particular alphabetical things, but moving a language from one alphabet to the Latin alphabet is, I mean, I think there are over 100 variations of the word Muhammad in English because it's a limited number of letters in Arabic, and English insists on making it more letters. So we just get really creative with how to spell it. And then deciding, is this the same Muhammad as that Muhammad? What else do we have as far as questions? Okay, I think this is a safe place to wrap it so that we can all have time to get to the next talk and let people here into the room. Thank you all. This is a joy. I'm so glad to see your happy faces. Thank you again.
Thank you.